State Department has responded to an RT report documenting how terrorists in eastern Aleppo are preventing the civilian population from leaving. We'll hear Washington's view in a moment. Our crew managed to film the only flags that can be seen over the east of Aleppo. One of them belongs to Jabhat al-Nusra, the other ISIL. Although Islamic State is not known to be present there, its sympathizers apparently are. On top of that, RT spoke to many locals who claim they live in constant threats of terrorist sniper fire.
Some people do manage to escape, but rebel snipers shoot at them when they see them. They don't allow civilians to leave.
Getting around for us is very hard because we have to use alleys, side streets and holes in walls. It's very sad. We can't use the streets. We can't even send kids to school.
I'm always scared of shells. They destroyed our house there, but we hid in the basement.
Gaine Chichikan went to the U.S. State Department to ask whether Washington still believes there are any so-called moderate rebels in the country's most troubled city.
Our correspondent reporting from Western Aleppo interviewed locals who say fighters in the rebel-held east deliberately fire at civilians who are trying to leave. Aren't these people effectively held in Aleppo, in eastern Aleppo?
I can't confirm that report. You know, I don't get into battlefield reports. I'm not going to do that. What is without dispute is that the siege of Aleppo continues, as I was mentioning earlier, and you know, your question about being held hostage. There should be, you know, and I've seen, you know, reports that they're allowed to leave. They shouldn't have to leave, and they shouldn't be being bombed by their own government and by the Russian military, and that's what needs to stop.
The UN Syria envoy Staffan de Mistura had earlier called on al-Nusra to leave eastern Aleppo, saying they're, quote, deciding the destiny of 270,000 civilians. For many months, the rebels in eastern Aleppo had been either unable or unwilling to kick out al-Nusra. Instead, some of the groups became so intertwined with the terrorists that efforts to separate them have failed. Eastern Aleppo is run by al-Qaeda militarily. How do you imagine people living peacefully under al-Qaeda?
I think, first of all, I'm not going to get into a debate about who runs what neighborhood in Aleppo with you. We've been clear, and so has 65 other nations have been clear that the threat of terrorism in Syria is significant, predominantly from Daesh and from al-Nusra. And that's why the coalition will continue operations across multiple lines of effort, not just military, to degrade and defeat, particularly Daesh inside Syria.
Not clear if U.S. officials have a clear picture of what exactly al-Nusra controls in eastern Aleppo. And there's an impression that they don't want to get into that, at least now. Washington wants to stop the operations by Syrian and Russian militaries in eastern Aleppo. But what instead? Is it the U.S. strategy just to let al-Qaeda run that place?
I'm not even going to dignify that question with an answer. I'm just not even going to dignify it.
The pretense that there are any moderates at all in this conflict is very important to Washington's policy. They have to pretend that there are so-called moderates out there, because how else do they explain a policy that they claim wants to fight terrorists on the one hand, but also regime change and overthrow Assad on the other? So they have to pretend there's some third force there, even though anybody who's really following this very closely knows that overwhelmingly the opposition to the Damascus government are Wahhabist, Salafist terrorists, either part of al-Qaeda, allied with al-Qaeda, or with ISIS. So they keep pretending and pretending, but they know that it is not true.
Murat Gazdiev reports now from Aleppo on the reasons why joint Russian-US efforts to fight terrorism have failed.
Nowadays, it's all about Aleppo. The trouble is, all the hysteria, the blaming, the propaganda make it impossible to tell what's going on. But it starts making some sense when you get here.
The agreement between the United States and Russia also mandated the creation of humanitarian corridors so that people from eastern Aleppo, behind those earthworks, could come into western Aleppo. The Syrian government, for its part, created 7 crossings that civilians could use to move to and fro. The rebels, Islamists on the other side, barricaded those crossings and mined them. For 4 weeks, no civilians have been able to cross, and the United States has failed to convince them to lift that blockade.
The only people who get out are those that manage to escape, and not everyone can do that. Dr. Hayak hasn't seen his patients from East Aleppo in weeks.
Nowadays, people there, all of them, they are a big jail. These tourist people do not allow anybody to come here because they think this is a card to play with the government.
East Aleppo is controlled by Nusra, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria. The very same extremists that the United States has urged moderate rebels to split with. It promised they would do so. But it doesn't seem to be happening. Hundreds of al-Nusra fighters are flying their flag on the front lines in East Aleppo. One thing that Russia and the United States agree on is that the fanatical zealots must be fought. Russian jets hit ISIS and other Islamists with, on average, 150 airstrikes a day. The United States-led coalition manages about 12 airstrikes a day, and only against ISIS. They're apparently avoiding hitting Nusra near Aleppo, with the latest confirmed strike in April. The entire point of the peace plan was to spare the people of Aleppo, and a major clause was the creation of an aid route along Castello Road in northern Aleppo. For that to happen, the belligerents needed to withdraw heavy weapons and troops. Russia says the Syrian military began to pull back its forces on 2 occasions, something the United States disputes. The rebels never even bothered. The deafening cacophony of blame and rhetoric make telling what's actually happening in Syria incredibly difficult, perhaps on purpose. A game of nations in which the lives and futures of Aleppo's people are little more than currency for politicians. Morad Gazdiev, RT in Aleppo.